This is Monopoly. See what I did there? Maybe not. I don't know. Alright, in this video you will learn the profit maximizing strategy for a monopolist. Alright, Monopoly. One producer is the only supplier of a good with no close substitutes. They're going to have a little bit of power for themselves. Alright, so a monopolist. Since a monopolist is the only supplier of a good, they have, or its demand curve is the market demand curve. Therefore, it is downward sloping. So we already know way back from Unit 1 that we have downward sloping demand curves. Alright, so we take that as a given. Market demand curve slope downward. Think back to our friends in perfect competition. Those are price takers. So you have the market demand curve. So on the left-hand side, this is perfect competition. The market demand curve is downward sloping. However, their output cannot affect the market price. Therefore, they take that price as a given. Therefore, their demand curve that the individual firm faces is horizontally sloping, which means that regardless of how much they change their output by, their marginal revenue will be unchanged. This demand curve for the monopolist on the right-hand side, however, it simply is the market demand curve, so it is downward sloping, and that will have some serious impacts on what their decisions will be. What this means is that for the monopolist to sell more output, they must lower their price because they have a downward sloping demand curve. So if they want to go from looking at these numbers from selling a quantity of 2,000 to 4,000, they're going to have to drop their price from somewhere at around $4 to $3 in this example. So by reducing output, so if they do the opposite and they reduce output, they can raise their price. So we would say that a monopolist is a price maker. They can set and make their own price. They do so by controlling the amount of output that they produce. More output is a lower price. Less output, higher price. The question quickly becomes, then what is the right amount for them to charge? What should they do? Because we have two competing forces involved every time they change their prices. We have a quantity effect and we have a price effect. So what we're looking at here is what happens when they decide to sell more. So both of these things take place. So we're going to say that we were at point A, P1 was the initial price, and Q1 was our initial quantity. But we move from A to B. The quantity effect of moving from A to B is that an additional unit sold increases total revenue. So we have the price of that unit times the additional quantity sold. So the price at B, so P2 times the quantity sold between Q1 and Q2, the increase in quantity, we multiply that and that will equal our quantity effect. So our quantity effect implies that a lower price will increase total revenue because that lower price leads to an increase in quantity sold. So that's what the quantity effect says happens. But what about ... the price effect? The price effect says that to sell the additional unit, they must cut the price of all units sold, decreasing total revenue. So we have two things that are in play, have opposite effects. So the price effect is going to be that on the upper left-hand side, so from point A, that's the price effect. When you look at from point A and then move left to where it says initial price and new price, that shaded box, that's the price effect because this is the revenues that they lost. So they had those revenues before because they had sold the quantity, the initial quantity, at the initial price, point A, but now they've lowered the price. So the price between A and B, they've lost that for all the quantities they had already sold. So their total revenue will fall. Again though, there is that quantity effect, which is the opposite. Because at lower price, they sell more, so they gain total revenue. So depending on which one of these is stronger is going to influence where they want to be producing. So again, keep in mind that they face both a price effect and a quantity effect. Alright, so what does the monopolist's marginal revenue curve look like? It looks like this. It is downward sloping and it is always below the demand curve. It's below the demand curve because of the price effect. So the price effect causes marginal revenue from selling an additional unit to always be less than the price charged for that unit. Alright, what is happening here is that when they change the price from $10 to $9, Was their marginal revenue $9? Because that's the additional. So they sell one more unit at $9. Did they gain 9? And the answer is no, because they lost that $1 in dropping their price on however many they had previously sold. So marginal revenue will always be less than the demand curve. It will always be below the demand curve. And marginal revenue will always be less than the price. Because unlike perfectly competitive firms, which the price is the marginal revenue, so if the price is $10, they gain $10 by selling that unit because they didn't change their price. For the monopolists, they had to cut their price, so they experience a price effect, causing marginal revenue to be less than the price. I can't overstate the importance of that principle. So go back, rewind it if you need to, read about whatever you need to do to understand that. Make sure you do, because that is hugely important to understanding imperfect competition. All right, speaking of imperfect competition, it's not just monopolists who have this downward sloping marginal revenue curve. Any firm that has market power has a downward sloping demand curve, and in turn will have a marginal revenue curve that is below their demand curve. At low levels of output, also known as the elastic region of the demand curve, the quantity effect is stronger, meaning that lowering the price and increasing the output will lead to an increase in total revenue. However, at higher levels of output, the inelastic region, the price effect is stronger than the quantity effect, so increasing output will lead to lower total revenue. In fact, looking at this, if you look at 5.5 as the quantity of water, that's where marginal revenue becomes 0. That's where the price effect and the quantity effect are exactly equal to one another. When you get below that, when you look at the 6th unit sold, the marginal revenue actually turns negative. The price effect is now stronger than the quantity effect. When our marginal revenue curve was positive, our quantity effect was stronger than the price effect. Sounds a bit like a riddle, but if you got to go back, definitely go back and listen to it again. Last thing, what is the monopolist's profit maximizing strategy? How do they decide where to produce? It's actually very simple. They maximize profit by using the optimal output rule. Here it is again, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So they produce at that same intersection. The difference here, they have a downward sloping MR curve. So look and find where MC equals MR. That will be the quantity that they produce. However, that is not the price that they will charge. Because now to find the price, we need their demand curve to see what the market is willing to pay. And at that quantity of output, at Q star, the quantity demanded for that, we have to move upwards from quantity. We find our spot on the demand curve at the intersection of Q star and P star. That will be P star, the price that we will charge, or the monopolist will charge. So they're able to charge a higher price than marginal revenue. And remember, we already said that marginal revenue will be less than the price. So the price is P starred, the quantity is Q starred, because that is where MR equals MC. This has been a LaMoney production.